pleasure to introduce our colleagues and guests from the State Corporation Roskosmos. First of all, Василий Михайлович Гуднов, head of the division of multilateral cooperation of the Department of International Cooperation. Василий Михайлович, you are welcome.
Thank you very much for introduction and giving me the floor, dear colleagues and distinguished participants. Let me thank foremost our organizers for hosting this the third Winter Space School and their contribution to capacity building in space policy and space diplomacy. In my point of view, it's very important to create new specialists and to share our opinion on these challenges and threats we are facing now due to current geopolitical situation. It's great to have an opportunity to exchange views on current and prospective challenges and to evaluate some shortcomings across the situation. My hope is to spur some discussion amongst the bright and talented persons in this conference room and well elsewhere on some of the most pressing issues related. Addressing to your professional skills, I want to mention a few basic aspects of human activities in outer space domain. Then I'll cover what I consider are the most important issues relevant to space exploration and utilization in the existing circumstances. Finally, I want to describe you some proposals for space policymakers, which I believe could play real dividends for the entire humankind community and be very hard choices for all of us over the next few years. I'll try to keep my intervention short, and we will allow some time for questions and answers. Ultimately, I envision bolstering our cross-discipline, all working in common cause. So let me start, and the first part of my intervention is some common aspects of outer space. There is no clear line as to where it starts and where it's no clear line as where it ends. At the beginnings of space era, despite the knowledge obtained to that moment, scientific, on the universe structure, Homo sapiens adopted the geocentric model of outer space, maybe due to archaic imagination and political map of the Earth at that time. Space was declared as a province that could not be appropriated in any way by anyone. It was probably because states had already considered the new domain as prospective field for distinctive activities fostering national goals achievement. For the first time in the humankind history, the pioneer that discovered a new territory which had not been under the jurisdictions of any state, not occupied and not appropriated it to exploit the new opportunities offered by the new territory. What is still clear for now, that outer space is beyond the limits of any national jurisdiction. They think so, but for some nations, it was clear until the last decade. The intensive acceleration of science research and development of applied technologies, extensive consumption of limited natural resources on the Earth impose the intentions of some states take an opposite approach for space law development. After an initial phase of exploration of outer space for the benefit of all humankind, as was declared, a new trend came into the scene. The political climate has changed tremendously. Geopolitical factors, including shift in international relations, become for many states the reasons for changes in the space utilization priorities. Today, space exploration is a political, military, scientific, and commercial agenda. Some countries are now trying to prove the priority of their own experience, provide expertise, and dominate in the field. New actors are fast developing their skills and technology, many seeking technology transfer to further the course. In the coming decade, intensifying competition between great powers will have a significant impact on the development of space activities and on the future of international cooperation in the field. Nevertheless, all space powers pay much attention to cooperation with its allies and partners, which will allow it to increase not only the sustainability of its space infrastructure, but also, if necessary, its operational effectiveness. Recent international agreements demonstrate that, unlike in the last decade of the 19th century, international space cooperation in the coming decade will not be global, but will proceed mainly between regions and blocks. At the same time, the risk of full-fledged confrontation in outer space is increasing, primarily due to the degradation of military political relations between states down on Earth. This is where we are today, facing a shift of paradigm with changes of goals, motivations, actors, approaches, and due to that, new challenges and threats. This speaks directly to how we must enhance our efforts to sustain our operations in space over the long term and includes overcoming significant challenges, such as the need for more effective management of national space activity, including international cooperation. That is the situations I'll try to describe to you, and this demonstrate new trends, because at the beginning, it was very emotional motivation for all nations. All nations declare that space should not be appropriated by any means, and it's a province for all humankind. But now, then space become not only the territory of scientific research, but the territory for some commercial and military interests. These approaches changed dramatically. So next decade, we will have very hard choices. And those choices demonstrate different approaches, because there are two main approaches that demonstrate the difference between the vision on outer space. One approach is still based on the international provisions of Space Treaty of 1967, that outer space should not be used for any kind of military operations, that it's not appropriated to use force or threat of force in outer space, and that outer space could not become a place for any combat operation. That activities of one space actor, I mean state, and all firms and the private sector and governmental sector, which is under the jurisdiction of each state, should not have a negative influence on the space activity of other space actor. But the second approach declared that there is some, or sometimes the only, space actor which, due to high level of technological development, political influence, military power, has the right to dictate the rules and principles of operations, not only on Earth, but also in outer space. We are not agreed with such approach, because in our point of view, it's totally violates the international law, but it exists. But certainly there is no state that could provide such politics being isolated. And that means that to achieve the goals declared in such kind of policy, or even main powers need support from its allies. That lead us to creation of blocks, and it's more important that such kind of blocks divided not by scientific approaches, but political ones. That is the main threat of today. In 2 previous decades, the number of space actors increased dramatically. Earlier, there were only governmental space programs, but today we have large corporate investment and betting big with industry. This growth and modern space technologies determined new opportunities and prospects led to the intensive development and diversification of space activities. Space competition has the comprehensive nature. Like never before, states depend on this vital domain for a wide range of strategic interests, including these of, as I said, scientific, military, commercial, social, and economic development. Use of space exploration as a diplomatic tool became prevalent in context of preventing confrontation. First, competition and cooperation, the dichotomous linkage, are prerequisite for progress in space activities and their sustainable development, if competition does not turn into confrontation, of course. While not eliminating competition, cooperation nevertheless significantly reduces its negative effects. Cooperation is also the most effective and rational way to reduce the risk of destabilizing spread of space technologies, which are known to be largely dual in nature. In order to reduce conflict potential, it's necessary to lay the foundations for expanding and strengthening international cooperation. Overall, the legal base for such kind of cooperation, The current decade is a period of revision in all spheres of international and interaction between leading space powers and developing space sectors. Positive results of such a revision will help to reduce uncertainty in the evolution of international space activities, effectively link short-term policy objectives, including military ones, with long-goal terms, economic, scientific, technological, and military, which is the large-scale space projects and implemented will span decades and determine the optimal scenario of interaction between leading space powers in outer space. Current space activities have a number of distinctive features. As I said, we could now make a choice, and we should make a choice, and maybe have to make a choice, because we are standing on the crossroad. We could turn to use outer space as a battlefield to solve the possible conflict between space powers, and we should prevent outer space from arm racing and preserve outer space to be convenient for current and future generations for exploration and use only in peaceful purposes. That's our choice, and it's a very difficult choice due to current geopolitical situation, as I said. At present time, countries unite in order to complement their own capabilities, giving priority to the development of the main infrastructure space assets that ensure the basic independence of their own space activities. The world community should not lose outer space for the benefit of common progress. The third decade of the 21st century will lay the foundations for future international cooperation in space. As I said, that means that is our choice, and those conflicts we are facing now and that could be passed to the outer space, the source of these threats is on Earth, not in outer space. Because even in current situation, we still have cooperation with our United States partners in ISS, International Space Station. We still have some common programs with different foreign partners. But we don't know how it could be converted due to the new course of global policy on Earth. It depends on us, it depends on you as a future diplomats, as a future politics. And we would like to give you some views for space policy makers. And we expect that you could analyze our proposals, our main directions we indicate in this presentation, and give maybe some thoughts and maybe detailed opinion how to achieve those goals and how to organize this process. In our opinion, only a balance between competition and cooperation that neither slow down nor hinder each other can create necessary and sufficient conditions for the sustainable development of international space activities. In these circumstances, it would seem appropriate to, and at least, identify the range of problems and objectives that require the pooling of efforts and resources and change the algorithm of cooperation from chaotic to systemic. It means that we should view not only the near-term goals for cooperations, we should have a strategic view, because it's a very huge investments developing not only space assets, but ground infrastructure as well. So it's need to cooperate, to combine all resources, human resources, economic resources, technological possibilities. That means consider the internationalship between civilian, commercial, and military programs, as well as dual purpose programs, including with due regard to non-proliferation issues. I describe it briefly because there are few proposals on removing space debris, objects that we are used to name title space debris. But certainly such kind of techniques could be used not only to remove or destroy those objects called space debris, but to destroy any space object, even belonging to another state. That means that such means and tools could be used as a weapon. So we need a special legal regime to using such techniques. And that leads us to the understanding that we need some international agreements, how to use some tools or some techniques in outer space. What is better, to use such kind of techniques or to abstain from using such kind of techniques, not to create any conflict in outer space? We need to launch a dialogue on potential cooperation in the military space sphere. I mean, particular attention should be paid to theoretical and practical research in the field of cyberspace security, taking into account not only the new technological capabilities, but also the increased vulnerability of space infrastructure. Because there is not only the only one need to physically protect the orbital assets and space constellations, but there is a need to protect the communication between Earth infrastructure, control system, and space assets. Because you could not destroy physically any space object, but you could put some influence on communication between them, on control lines. That means you could interfere in the operational process, and the owner will lose the control over its space assets. That needs a special regulation as well. And Finally, active international cooperation in the field of space activities should be considered not only a necessary condition for the evolution of space activity, but also an instrument for resolving the geopolitical crisis and restoring trust between countries and regions. Because outer space is beyond the national jurisdictions, future international agreements may be required to address these and other questions we have yet to imagine, even not all threats we could imagine now, for now. We could not predict how it will be developed in the future, what kind of new techniques we will have to be applied. So we expect that we have not the limited list of threats in our vision. Therefore, the international regulatory framework should clearly prevail on national regulations and limit the capacity of countries to use less stringent regulations as mean to attract foreign business. At the same time, some considerations also have to be given to how to enforce at a national level the agreed principle and norms adopted by on truly international basis. I would like to clarify a little bit this point. For example, there is some state that provide us with best practices, saying that it has some best practices approved during the long term of space activities. That means that other states, other space sectors should adopt those best practices on international level, and after that, implement those recommendations, principles, and norms in their own national legislation. We are not agree with such approach because not only one state, not only the group of states have such kind of best practices, because all of us, not depending on the level of technological development in space activities, have different practices. Someone in boosters, someone in life-saving systems for astronauts and cosmonauts. So in our point of view, such kind of norms, principles, and rules should be developed only in truly international basis. It means on the platform of the United Nations organization. Overall, in the Committee for Peaceful Use of Outer Space and its subsidiaries, like Scientific and Technical Subcommittee and Legal Subcommittee, and military questions certainly on the Conference on Disarmament. But there is no doubt that nations can cooperate in outer space peacefully. It's our main opinion, and it's the basis for us to develop the relationship with our partners, with that despite the situation, we still consider that there is a possibility to develop the international cooperation in outer field, because it gives us not only the new possibilities and new tools to solve any solve any task in different branches of economy on Earth, but it gives us the new knowledge about the universe, about who we are. It's the main questions of all humankind. So thank you very much for your attention. I expect that you will give us your opinion, your questions, and we will try to answer properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Василий Михайлович. Евгений Кищенко, your question, please.
Thank you for such a comprehensive discussion. Can you hear me?
Yes, certainly.
Inter-Regional Cooperation Fund, Baikal Strategy, Evgeny Tищенко. I want to ask you about the ISS and potential cooperation. That the ISS inspires lots of debate. For some, it is an astonishing example of international cooperation, a scientific outpost serving as a training ground for missions beyond Earth's orbit, and an inspiration to the school children who talk to the astronauts within. For others, it is a scandalous boondoggle, a single into which billions are still poured with incommensurate scientific benefit. But one thing cannot be argued. It is a triumph of engineering and, in the words of David Nixon, the first example of great architecture beyond Earth. In your opinion, does Russia need a new orbital station, or it could create some kind of excessive competition in space? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And certainly, I agree with you completely that ISS is outstanding creation of all humankind in space. But due to your questions, if I understand properly, does Russia need has a need for orbital station for development? Is that right?
Yes, for the development, but we have some excessive competition, and maybe it is not a development and some kind of competition.
Fortunately, ISS it's a good opportunity to preserve our international cooperation in outer space, in spite of the current geopolitical situation. And if you have seen such films on astronauts and cosmonauts working in ISS, the relationship between them and the kind of this friendship and professional behavior during the completion of the mission. So in my vision, in my point of view, ISS still provide three main points for international cooperation. First, it's serve as a tool to increase transparency and in space activities, certainly, and trust between different space actors. It's one point. The second point is ISS still provide opportunities for different scientific research that could be led only in outer space, such as new materials, new medicine, new biological experiments, and other. And the third one, ISS will provide us to prove new technologies for developing new possibilities in future. For example, you know that during the missions, our cosmonauts and foreign astronauts tried to use different tools for creation, new materials, new constructions, and as well new models. And this incident with repairings and with incidents with space debris that sometimes provide emergent situation in ISS, it's should be taken not only as an incident, but as well as an opportunity to face and to remove the consequences and maybe some negative impact of such incidents in outer space, because it's very important. Because who knows what could be happened during the long-term missions in deep outer space. So, in my point of view, ISS is still a very useful tool, and it's a very good place, not only for, as you said, competition, but cooperation, and it provides us with possibilities for future space exploration and scientific research of the universe. Thank you.
Thank you, Василий Михайлович. Juan Weitao, your question, please.
Okay, thank you for your speech about the cooperation, and actually my question is that how in your opinion, how far, I mean, during the cooperation between China and Russia, how far they can go, and I mean, in the space explore area, how deep they can get. I mean, especially during this conflict, the quite complex background during the international competition. How far the cooperation between China and Russia, they can go deeper and far. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Badel, for your questions. It's very interesting. We are ready for cooperation with any kind of international partners, but certainly China is our main partner, not only for now, but for the long time, and we expect as a strategic partner for the future. We are ready for cooperation in different branches of space activities using new technology, new space constellations, new applied technology, scientific research. And certainly, there is two main goals for us now, and this is fostering the development of our technological capabilities and maybe combined with China and maybe technological transfer on the basis of mutual cooperation and fruitful cooperation. And that it not prevent us, and that certainly not prevent our European partners that are ready to cooperate with China and Russia. And certainly we will not allow any kind of cooperations that could lead to the discriminations of our relationship with other partners. So that means that if we will have a proposal from our European colleagues for cooperation, there should not be any conditions that in that case we should reject with cooperation with other, for example, with China. Not at all. We will not allow such a proposal. We, as China, as Russia, we are independent states, so there is no one who could dictate us how to construct our international relationship. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Василий Михайлович, for your presentation and answers. And now I have a pleasure to introduce Dmitry Sergeevich Babkin, Chief Specialist of the Division of Multilateral Cooperation of the Department of International Cooperation, State Corporation Roskosmos. Dmitry Sergeevich, please, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to have the floor now before the audience. Can you switch on the presentation? Next slide. Second slide, please. Yeah. So the topic of my presentation is current developments in the space arena and what we can and shall do with these changes. In current times, as we see, the overall phase of the space activities is changing, even though the number of actual space powers is not changing. We see that many new actors are showing on the space arena. Just to clarify, I'm saying space powers in that term that space power is a nation that can independently produce spacecrafts, satellites, and which has an independent access to the space. Of course, for the last point, there are some difficulties. For example, we know that France and Germany are unmistakably space powers, but for example, France cannot launch Ariane 5 without Germany and vice versa. And after they phase out the Ariane 5 launcher and when they will use Ariane 6, the Italy will come to the same equation. Also, we see that UK and with this logic, UK and South Africa are space powers no more, unfortunately, but South Korea has demonstrated its own capability for independent access to the space. Anyway, we see that a lot of new space sectors have emerged, and many of them have their budgets exceeding even the space powers. For example, Argentina, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Indonesia, all of them have their budgets exceeding that of, for example, Israel or Iran, who are space powers. And even though, as I've said, these new actors do not have yet their independent access to the space, it is obvious that their ambitions will drive them to obtain it. Second point, which we should take into notice while looking on this slide, is that these budgets are only comparative, and they don't give us numbers for the private industry. You may even see that it is at governmental expenditures. They do not cover private entities which are playing more and more significant role in the space activities, even though some of them are subsidized, even heavily subsidized by governments. Next slide, please. And as I've already said, we see a lot of new actors in the space arena. They are both regional countries and new space powers. Sometimes they are driven by their differences and by their competition, like it is, we have competition between China and India, or for example, between China and Japan. And they undertake large efforts to step up their space activities. All these countries have already performed their scientific expeditions of unmanned spacecrafts to the moon and to the Mars. And if we talk about Japan has the unique experience of landing on asteroids and other celestial bodies. Now, all these three countries also have their ambitions in the field of human spaceflight, and well, China is well ahead of anybody between these three countries because China has its own piloted spacecraft and a big orbital space station. Japan does not have its own spaceflight capability, but it participates in ISS project, and India is developing its own spacecraft with substantial support from the side of the Russian Federation. But we also have additional players that coming up to the show, like United Emirates and Indonesia. United Emirates their budgets are comparable, but United Emirates are quite ahead of, because they have already performed their missions to the moon, and they have performed their space flights, even though with the help of Russia and the United States. But nevertheless, we are sure that these space ambitions will drive them to play a more significant role in the future. Next slide, please. What is the problem is that unfortunately the space activity and this surge of new actors is often motivated and powered by political issues, political interests, and political confrontations. For example, even before the current situation, geopolitical situation has worsened, we already had quite tense relations, tense discussions regarding the use of space resources. So many countries were driven by their desire to appropriate the space resources and to install their own rules, overwhelming the existing international space law or United Nations activities, including in the framework of United Nations Committee for Outer Space Affairs. Now, as Vasily Gudnov has already said, we have another problem on the table. I could even say several problems on the table, like militarization of the space and the active debris removal and other difficult issues that unfortunately does not have a common platform for resolving them, because unfortunately every blocus has its own desires and in its own drivers, political drivers for supporting, first of all, its own position. What example I can give is, for example, the so-called Artemis Accords, which are in most areas some kind of substitution to previous agreements on the international and multilateral level. So they are substituting with them existing space law. And with these rules, we see that some space powers are trying to impose their own laws upon other actors. They are saying, of course, that we should play by the rules approved by everybody, but I can also cite a well-known old, but nevertheless still actual saying, British saying, that when a gentleman is playing a game and he cannot win it by the rules, he can change these rules. Next slide, please. So what is obvious for us that this situation should be countered, and one of the way to counter this situation, I could call it unilateralization of space law, is cooperating in the framework of large regional or international unions, like, for example, Eurasian Economic Union, or, for example, BRICS Union. I would like to say a few more words about our activities in the framework of BRICS Union, because currently we already have an outstanding record of cooperation with different participants of BRICS. For example, we cooperate a lot in the field of Earth observation and navigation systems with both China and India, even though these countries are do not always cooperate well with each other and are, let's say, competitors between them. But nevertheless, we cooperate with both of them. Also, we have a large-scale cooperation project with China on the International Scientific Lunar Station, with India on the piloted spaceflight program. I've already said about this, but also on rocket technologies. As for South Africa and Brazil, we have a very active cooperation with them in the field of space traffic management, as well as of mitigation of dangerous situation in the near Earth space. We do hope that this bilateral or sometimes trilateral cooperation will be a basis for a convergence between our countries. And so we are already discussing different multilateral cooperation initiatives in the framework of BRICS. We have already started with Earth observation by signing the declaration of on cooperation in this field. It was done last year. Next slide, please. Anyway, we do see that the existing situation on the space in the sphere of space activities should be taken into account, and we shall work together to mitigate the existing threats and to go together to the space, because space has no boundaries. And if we project our national boundaries into the space, this will show everybody that we cannot do that we are worse than our predecessors who were able to sign the Antarctic agreements or Moon agreement, who could put aside their national claims for Arctic territories, and who cooperated for decades, for tens of years, on exploration of Antarctics. We will show that we cannot do the same that our predecessors were able to do. And this is crucial point for us, I believe, that we should find points of cooperation, points of convergence, and overcome the existing political agendas which are hampering our road to the future, to the new boundaries of exploration and to the humanity. Because as we see in the past, and as Konstantin Tsiolkovsky already said that Earth is a cradle for the humankind, but it is a cradle too small, and the humanity cannot live its whole life in the cradle. The humanity always strived to go to the boundaries of the known world and beyond. And we shall do together, and you as new future diplomats, future scientists, should work on these too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dmitry Sergeevich, for very comprehensive intervention. And I would like to add only that it's very important. I would not like to thrilling you, but it's important not only to explain our vision, our proposals. There is a need for people who are ready to listen to our ideas and would like to discuss this. It's not quite enough to listen to. They should hear and understand those proposals, and it depends on you how you could formulate this new agenda in economic and political, military aspects of space activities, and not only in space activities, but in all kinds of international cooperations in all branches of international relationship. Thank you very much. And we found out some questions published in our chat of the conference. We will try to answer on all of them. I will read every question, and we will try to give your exact answer. The first question is from Sofia Mitropolskaya. How do you think it's possible to create a neutral territory for research, scientific and commercial and other joint activities? For example, Antarctica is a neutral territory for research. As Dmitry Sergeevich said, certainly we have a good experience for research in Antarctica, but I would like to notice that outer space is a natural territory due to provisions of International Space Treaty, because there is no jurisdictions of any state over the outer space. There is only the international law that regulate the regime of space activities in space. So that means that we have a natural territory, but in my point of view, it's very important to have the common understanding and the common regulation based on international law that all space sectors should adopt on national level, not to produce any contradiction, not to produce any conflicts in outer space. That is more important. And I would like to say that nowadays it's one of the most important issues that should be solved briefly, because there are new branches of space activities, such as space debris removal, such as natural resources consumption in outer space, and overall maybe not only mineral resources, but as a territory of celestial bodies. It's certainly a resource and limited resource because there is a lot of territory, for example, on the moon that is convenient for exploration and for lunar bases. So it's one question, it's my opinions. And but joint projects are still rare. How quickly can something change in this regard? I could not predict how quick it could be changed in regard of the current geopolitical situation. It depends on goodwill and political will of all space powers. If any would like to sign an agreement and jointly lead one space project, we are ready, always ready for that. There are only few conditions that this agreement should not be a discrimination, not only for parties, but for other space nations and overall for other countries. It's my answer for Sofia Mitropolskaya. And the next questions came from Leila Bayramova. Then will ISS be decommissioned, and will Russia leave the ISS? How the international cooperation preserve the Russia builds its own orbital station? Dmitry, could you see? I give the floor to Dmitry.
Okay. So for ISS, all countries that are part of this project have already confirmed their willingness to use the ISS station beyond the year 2024. After this date, the use of the ISS will be assessed basing on its technological properties, because some of the modules of the station are quite old, and some were taken up by space shuttle, which is used no more, and thus the replacement is nearly not possible now. Anyway, this decision will be made on the basis of consensus, as it is stipulated by the ISS documents signed by all the parties. Nevertheless, we always should look further, and that's why, in order to sustain our technological capabilities and engineering capabilities, we are currently developing the new, smaller size national space station, and it will be launched as, in first place, as complement to the ISS and possible cooperation with Chinese, because this is not a secret. We are in talks with our Chinese colleagues for possible cooperation on board of their orbital station. So we shouldn't look on the new Russian space station as that we go off and that we bail off ISS and international cooperation. We are always open for it. ROS station is complementing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry. And the next question, yes, certainly from Leila Baranova as well. What are your comments on the situation between Russia and Germany in the Spectre G mission from the point of international relations? Would you like to answer?
With Spectrum RG, the situation is that the Rosita instrument was supplied by the German side as its input to the joint mission. And well, frankly speaking, it is owned by Germany and operated by Germany. So it was their own decision to switch it off. It is quite obvious that this decision was politically motivated, and we can only express our sadness that the political agenda has impacted the scientific research and scientific output, because it was quite an important part of the scientific payload for the Spectrum RG, which is still on orbit and still operating, but with Russian payload only. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry. And the next questions, one question is from Roman Kalin. Since there are more state and non-state actors involved in space activities, are there any risk for missile technology control regime, MTCR? No, Roman, there is no any risk for this regime, because that is state who is responsible for all states' activities led by any kind of institutions under the jurisdiction of that state. So states is responsible under the provisions of this regime as well, because this is obligation of states to control the space activities through some kind of licensing or other means of governmental control, or the private companies and other actors, maybe physical and juridical, in the state. So there is, in my point of view, and obviously there is no any risk. And the next questions from Leila Bayramova: what are the examples of cooperation between Roskosmos and ESA? Oh, there are a lot of examples of good cooperation between Roskosmos and ESA during the last decade. Overall, in the project of Kourou launch. There are still a lot of programs, but they were frozen for a time, not by our willingness, but it was a decision of our European colleagues, because actually ESA is an organization that uses the contributions from the member states, from the space agencies of different European countries, and not only those who are in the European Union, but a lot of more countries. And it's their own decision. We could not force the development of a relationship. We would like to invite our colleagues, and we invited certainly our colleagues for cooperations, and we are still open for such kind of interaction. And the next question is from Anna Tishina. Thank you for your comprehensive presentation. Thank you for your evaluation. And is there any possibility that activities in space could be officially regulated by international agreements? Commercial companies' activities, as I said during my answer on the previous questions, activities of all commercial countries, because all commercial countries registered in state registry, maybe not in national one, but maybe in a foreign one, but there is a state of registration of such a commercial countries. For example, in Luxembourg, a lot of commercial companies, enterprises registered, and they are nationally belongs to French, to German partners, and to other nations. But the country that registered of such a commercial enterprise is responsible, because during the registration, the license for activity, and it's obligation of the state, given the license, to control the completion of rules and norms and obligations under international law. And because the space treaty, it's not, it's a treaty of not only by states, applied not only by states that signed the treaty, but it's a common rule for all space actors. So that question is solved now. This problem doesn't exist. The problem is how to states interpret the provisions of international law and how it could apply, because you know that the provision of the law of a lay, for example, and its application during the some activities, it's could be very different, and depending not only on the national legislation, but on the way of thoughts of individual. So it's very important to exchange our views, and during we will answer on the next questions to make a balance between you and our, as the participants of our conference. We would like to provide you and ask you from our side, and we expect to receive the answer from some of you at the end of our answers. My question is, what do you think? What kind of steps and what kind of means and measures should apply Russia in the current geopolitical situation to obtain allies and like-minded states in its course to preserve outer space for peaceful purposes and preserve outer space convenient for such peaceful purposes, convenient for current and future generations, and other means how to avoid the placement of any kind of weapons in outer space, how to prevent an arms race in outer space, how to prevent outer space becoming a battlefield. It's the questions from our point. I'll continue to answer your questions. And the next question is from Zoya Baradulina. I am studying in the Synergy University IT. What specific specialists are in demand in Roscosmos from the IT sphere for missions to the moon and flight preparation? Oh, Zoya, it's a very good questions because we have a different departments. Some of them are developing strategy and policy on automatic spacecraft, and some of them are developing ground infrastructure, launching facilities. And in IT, I suppose it's a very wide possibility to apply your knowledge, your skills in different projects. It depends on, you should specificate what kind of IT techniques you would like to be professional. For example, there is, as I said in my intervention, it's a very good idea to be a specialist in cybersecurity and to protect communications and control lines between ground infrastructure and orbital constellation, because it's very, very important. It's one of the national priorities, and it's one of the biggest threats for today. We need the techniques, we need the technology, we need maybe new physically different lines for communication, for control systems, based not only on this of radio frequency or something like that, but maybe new ideas. The difference could maybe such big as in a screen of television we have now, LED screens and television for 20 decades later. It's very, very big difference, and we need such a big step for new technologies that could provide us with a better protection of satellites. But some of our partners said that we need a physical protection for satellites using maybe physical destroyment of other threatening objects. But we are talking about the defense techniques that not affect the activities of other space sectors. That's my point of view. Certainly, it's not the only one branch you could apply your skills, but it's in a border, in a cross line of my skills as a technician and as a lawyer. So I have both. So I'll combine both techniques. And for you as a IT technology specialist, should be better to be familiar with some legal aspects of space activities. It could facilitate and foster you to find out what kind of activities may be more interesting for you. And the next question is from Anna Ivanova. Thank you very much for your speeches. Dmitry, it's for you as well as for me. No, thanks. Not only for me, but for you as well. It was a pleasure to listen to your reports, for you especially. How do you think we cooperation with countries such as India and South Africa will affect the development of Russian space science? What positive aspects do you hope to get from these cooperations? Maybe this is a different approach to research or data.
Thank you for your question, and I will answer for it. So with India, we are already cooperating not only on some applied technologies like space launcher development or development of piloted spacecraft, but we also have quite a good experience on cooperating in the field of space exploration. India has already expressed its desire to participate in Russian lunar missions and has invited us to participate in its own mission to the Venus. So it will obviously give us additional input of scientific data on these planets. As for South Africa, currently the most important thing we can get from it is its support in our deep space missions, because South Africa has several stations for communicating with spacecrafts with interplanetary missions. Some of these infrastructures were built by United States for the Apollo missions, but some were developed by South Africans themselves. And they are very important for tracking the lunar missions and the missions to the Jupiter, to other celestial bodies in the solar system, because they are covering the southern hemisphere of the Earth, and thus the southern part of the sky, which is not visible from the territory of Russian Federation or from China, for example, or even from India. And thus, and in the scientific missions, the rule is very simple. The more receiving station you have, the more scientific information you will get, because you will simply have more windows for receiving scientific information. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitry. And the next question from Anastasia Milkova. Good afternoon. My name is Anastasia Milkova. I present the Higher School of Economics, St. Petersburg. Thank you very much for your reports. As you noted in your report, the number of new space sectors is growing rapidly. You also mentioned the Asia-Pacific countries, and I wonder if there are any space initiatives within the framework of the Asian +3 format. I mean the Asian countries and Japan, China, South Korea. Thank you, Anastasia, for your question. Certainly there is such initiative inside this regional organization as the Asian and +3 as well. And there are a lot of initiatives for the upper south. It's Asia-Pacific Asia-Pacific region Space Activities Forum. Space Activities Forum. There were a lot of issues discussed, both from economic cooperation, including developing new technologies for space activities, and applied technology, the use of the results of space activities, such as Earth observation techniques and remote sensing and navigation using in transportation system logistics. And there is a forum for discuss some legal aspects and the most important issue and the most important agenda in the region, as for us as well, is how to reduce the risk of space operations, how to increase the security of space assets, how to avoid any situation of collision, other impacts, and how to provide regulations, for example, for launching activities as well. There is a very huge agenda. There are a lot of questions. And the second part of your questions is an answer of my question, as I see. And certainly I share your opinion that United Nations platform is still the best place for discussion. But the main problem, as I said, that the only state, it's very difficult for the only one state to not to achieve the result of the proposal to be adopted or obtained or understood by other participants. But it's very difficult if we have no any like-minded. So my question was how to obtain an ally, or how to extend this circle of allies, and how to attract new countries, new votes to our own proposals, for example, on prevention of an arms race in outer space, on prevention from using some kind of technologies that could affect the interests of other space sectors, how to prevent this trend replacing the international law with domestic principles and rules, not based on legally binding agreements, but only on soft law that could be applied by one in different manner due to differences in national legislation, in different understanding. That's why my questions, I repeated, how to obtain new supporters, how to extend the support of such ideas, because a lot of our colleagues explain the understanding, explain the same approaches that they voted for the preserving of outer space for only for peaceful uses, certainly, but they are silent during those discussions, even in UN platform, in scientific and the technical subcommittee, during the session of legal subcommittee, even in General Assembly. That's why my question raised. How to obtain this great support from all of the participants, at least members of the United Nations. Thank you. And the next, I see no any question more. So if one of you have the possibility to explain or maybe to add something to our agenda, we are ready to listen to, and we are ready to those proposals and recommendations or maybe opinions to be heard.
Василий Михайлович,
at least by us. Thank you.
Василий Михайлович, I see several raised hands on the screen. Would you answer to these questions?
Why? What kind? I could not see. I see
Спасибо,
only
Нет, несколько рук поднято на экране, просто, да, если можно, ответьте на эти вопросы.
Can I help a little bit? Yeah, we have a question from Evgeny Tishenko, I think. Evgeny, are you able now to ask the question to the speakers?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a question and answer for proposals in space cooperation. First question, I want to ask about France. We already know that Ariane 5 rocket has been launched, the James Webb telescope into orbit. France with Germany cooperation, the interaction of satellite and radar system has been worked out. French Helios, German SAR loop. Together with Italy, Paris uses the Signal, the second, and a thin Fidus satellite. On your opinion, what are the future prospects for France in space, and can it take Russia's position in the space hierarchy? Thank you. And what about the proposals I want to add, if you don't mind, of space cooperation? We have dangers of further weaponization and militarization of cosmos. For example, anti-satellite weapon. A typical test might generate over 100,000 pieces of such anti-satellite uses of debris. Meanwhile, the number of satellites in orbit is rising fast. In the worst case, a combination of more clutter and more things to hit could begin a slow motion chain reaction, in which each collision produces more debris, making further collisions more likely. This called Kessler syndrome in the 70s could leave important orbits unusable for decades. I suppose that Russia can propose some independent program to eliminate debris in cosmos, in space, in outer space. For example, as has been mentioned with ASEAN +4 format, or with European countries with independent fund and some kind of foundation about bonds, obligations, as mentioned Dmitry Rogozin. And for example, in indirect cooperation with CERN and ITER programs, which can some influence in space. Thanks.
For the first part of your questions for future for France in outer space activities, I give the floor to Dmitry, and on the second part on space debris, I'll give you the answer after him.
So, when speaking about France, first of all, France is a part of the European Space Agency, and so it is taking part in many activities launched by ESA. As you may know, in the European Space Agency, there exists a principle of the so-called fair return. So when a country which is a part of ESA is contributing financially to the this or that project, then it obtains a share of industrial and scientific activities in building developing this program for its own space industry. Nevertheless, France always had its own national projects, which were done purely by French budget or in bilateral cooperation. Like, for example, they have performed Venmus project or Taranis. These are the scientific spacecrafts for Earth observation, which were constructed together with, for example, Israel, with India, with Brazil. They cooperate with Italy on remote sensing, but it's more dual use and more goes to the military things, but they also had and have their own scientific research. For example, they were part of our bilateral project together with India on Indian mission to the Venus, and they participated in our Beyond program. They have provided a high precision system for monitoring biological parameters of biological objects on board of this spacecraft. Also, they are cooperating with us on board of ISS because Russian cosmonauts are using several medical instruments developed by the French side. There were discussions to develop a follow-on for these medical and biological projects, but currently they are unfortunately on hold. Anyways, France is also cooperating a lot with China, even to the brink that two of French cosmonauts, or they prefer to call them spationautes, they went to stages for the training in China, training on ground with Chinese taikonauts and learning Chinese language. So this is a clear sign that they have some ideas for the future cooperation with China. Thank you.
Yeah, Dmitry Sergeyevich, thank you very much for the answer. We have 3 questions left, and as we're running out of time, I would kindly ask the participants to formulate the questions brief and clear. So we have a question from Alena Petrunina. Alena, are you ready to ask your question?
Of course, thank you very much for your reports, and I have a question and a replica about your question. So my question is, you talked about cooperation with Africa and 1,000 countries. Isn't this direction planned to execute with state corporations, or will the private sector also be involved in this?
Maybe once again, because we have a talk between us. What kind of questions?
You talked about cooperation with Africa and 1,000 countries. In this direction planned exclusively with state corporations, or will the private sector also be involved in this?
No, thank you for your questions, Alena, because certainly primary, there is a different level of cooperation, a different level of agreement. As you know, first of all is a frame agreement between the governments of the state. So that framework agreement declare the main branches of cooperation, and it's establish the common regime, taking into account the legal provisions of national legislation of both participants. And after that, there are so-called nominated organizations, private, governmental, scientific, overall institutions that could sign agreement, or maybe governmental bodies, space activities concerned. So they sign agreement on their own level, on interagency or some commercial contracts, but in their own contracts, they should not write down all provisions already solved, legal provisions solved in the agreements of the higher level. For example, such kind of agreements certainly include some conditions on non-disclosure methods, because you know the technology is very maybe dual use, and there is agreement on the end point of use and user, and maybe some special requirements depending on the national legislation. And in commercial contracts, they should only write down some addresses or address such provisions in accordance with the higher level documents and national legislation, addressing them, not to explain completely the whole text of such kind of agreements. It's very easy for private companies. It makes the contract shorter, and they could dedicate the paper to write down more technical aspects of the contract. That's why it's the way. And Dmitry would like to add something.
I would like also to say that with African countries, we work currently on a national bilateral level, but there are some perspectives for cooperation on with regional bodies, like, for example, a union of West African countries on maritime exploitation, on use of fish resources. Yes, and there is also an initiative of the African Union to create an African space agency, like an image of ESA, though this process is not yet completed, but we have already expressed our desire to cooperate with them, and this will be on multilateral level. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the answers. And the next question is from the participant with a very beautiful name, but I'm afraid I could mispronounce that. Ms. Aguirre Raquel, is this correct?
Yes, it's correct. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for your excellent speech. And my question is about how to prevent weaponization when the main discussions within the scope of the United Nations do not have consensus, and thus international cooperation tends more towards bilateralism than multilateralism. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, honorable experts. Is the question clear?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Raquel, for your questions. It's the same questions I have in my mind, how to prevent the militarization of water space. Because in my point of view, in my own capacity, I would like to say that it depends on the political will of the governments of every state. And it depends how many of us and how many states have the will to follow this approach to preserve outer space only for peaceful purposes. Because in my point of view, then states declare that the outer space is the common province for all humankind, and then all of them agreed that it should be used only for peaceful purposes, but they should decide what means peaceful purposes. For first step, they should declare what kind of uses of outer space should be considered as military purposes or peaceful purposes. Because nowadays, you know that some kind of operations and some kind of uses in outer space could be applied for military operation on Earth. And nowadays, they consider it as a peaceful use of outer space. But we have different opinions. For example, then it's used to protect your own state, to complete your own national security. It's okay, because it's your right. But if it affects the interest of other states, if it has an aggressive character and it affects the security of other states, we could not consider as a peaceful purpose. How to achieve? We explained different proposals. You know, we have our China-Russia proposals on the treaty prevention of arms race in outer space. We have an initiative as a good tool, as I see, and it was proved by the General Assembly that this initiative not put the first not be the first putting in outer space. It means that until we know that one state's deployed any kind of weapon or use force in outer space, we will abstain from using the same mean by Russian Federation. And this initiative was supported by a lot of countries, but it's still under consideration and under arguing of our Western colleagues, and it's a pity because that demonstrates the difference between the declarations they use on the UN platform and with their activities on the same way. And I would like to complete the answer to two questions before on space debris. I would like you to understand that the problem of space debris is a spin-off of space activities. It's the reason and the source of such kind of threat from space debris. It's space activity themselves. It's like a gas emission using a car. If you use a car, you have a gas emission. So if you have lead space activities, you always will have a space debris. But the problem to reduce the space debris or object that could be called space debris divided in two spheres, in two stages. One is a preemptive measures using during the construction, design, and utilization of different spacecraft and different space techniques. For example, you should create a spacecraft in such a way that could allow to remove it from orbit and to avoid during the launch the creation of additional space debris, additional technological objects that is not necessary. And certainly Russia have some national standards and applied international recommendation like as guidelines for space debris mitigation adopted by the General Assembly. But the second stage is, but this measure would only to reduce the growth of such kind of objects in outer space. It's just a preliminary measure, but it's still not prevent from space debris to be existing in outer space. The second part is how to remove those objects that called space debris from outer space. But that part is much more difficult because we still not have the legally binding definition for space debris. Our colleagues proposed to use the definition that non-functioning object could be called space debris. It's a very huge discussion, but it's not convenient for us because, as I said many times, not functioning doesn't mean they have no use in different purposes. So. It's still under discussion, it's still under consideration. As I said, dual use technology to remove space debris because it could be used not only to remove such unfunctioning objects, but as well as for any space object as a weapon. So it's provide the necessity to discuss a possible legally binding agreement among all states how to use such kind of tools. And please, we are ready for the next question.
Yeah, thank you very much. So this is the last but not least question from Andrei Chernikov. And Andrei is the student of Lomonosov Moscow State University, School of World Politics. Okay, Andrei, the floor is yours.
Thank you, but I have no question. I want to answer the question that was addressed to the audience by the speakers. Can I? Yeah, thank you. It won't take much time. Well, you might find my perspective quite radical, but still I'll express it. I guess for Russia, in order for Russia to attract more new allies and to guarantee their safe and peaceful space, Russia needs to become as powerful as possible, to become as supreme technologically, politically, militarily, economically as possible. And then the allies will themselves be very willing to cooperate with Russia. And the Russian Federation will be able to install and sustain the international regime that is beneficial for it in any sphere, in space or on the dimensions on the Earth. I guess the power is the best guarantee because, the state interests are prone to changes. And well, today you cooperate, tomorrow you'll be in conflict. And if you're powerful, it's not the case for you. So I guess that's the way. Naturally, it's complicated, but at the same time, it's quite simple. Thank you.
Andreas, thank you for your comment and for your answer. It's just the same. We have among us the same approach that we should improve our own capabilities. We should improve our attractiveness to other states because there are only two means during the whole history of the humankind used to attract new allies. It's a whip and carrot. And so that means if we have such kind of attraction, if we could be able to solve problems or aspiration of other nations, we could be attractive for them as a partners. It's our willingness, it's our proposals, and that means that to be attractive in the branch of space activities, we should be attractive not only in that part of our economy, we should be attractive on the part of our financial climate, we should be attractive in the part of our political system, we should be attractive in all branches of our economy. That means that we need specialists and we need capacity building not only in the space activities, not only in diplomacy overall, in international relationship, but we need good technologies, we need good specialists in all branches of our economy to make our country more attractive. It's a good answer because I expected that answer, because in my point of view, it's a very, very right answer. It depends on all of us, on every one of us. Thank you. So we are ready. We completed our agenda, but this day it's for beginning for us because in 1 hour we will have a meeting with our colleagues from Ministry of Foreign Affairs because next week we'll start scientific and technical subcommittee session in the United Nations Committee on Outer Space. And certainly we will use all our today discussion and your proposals as our thoughts during the conversation with our international colleagues. Thank you very much. It's very useful for us as well. And we appreciate organizers to take every year such a conference because it's a very good tool to extend the understanding between specialists who are now involved in the process and the young specialists because it's improve our capacity. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the informative answers. And of course, thank you for the participants who provided us with an opportunity to prolong our active and bright discussion. And today, now, if you don't mind, I will turn back to the Russian language. Сейчас мы уходим на небольшой перерыв в 15 минут. И, соответственно, в 13:10 мы перейдем ко второй части нашего сегодняшнего дня. Пока вы можете не отключаться, просто выключить камеры, и увидимся с вами через 15 минут. Спасибо.
Thank you. Thank you, Василий Александрович, for giving me the floor. Just a couple of seconds for me to share the screen. So here we are. I believe that you see it. So let us start. Dear colleagues, this is truly a great pleasure for me to be here today. And I believe that you are all well warmed up, I would say, with the previous conversation. It was a brilliant talk. And of course, again, my gratitude, personal gratitude to the previous speakers for being so informative and for sharing some facts that you will not find in the open source. But not only information was useful, some slides, actually, some particular slides from the Euroconsult resources, which you will not find by yourself, were also presented. And I believe this is a great opportunity for everyone to benefit from this particular event. So now we will try to narrow down a little bit the discussion and focus on the topic, which I a little bit playfully designated as China-India relations in space, where coexistence or happy marriage. As a disclaimer, I will say that I will not give you an exact answer, and probably none of the experts will be able to do so. But our task today will be to deliberate a little bit on the elements that this topic embraces. So our plan for this forthcoming hour is to deconstruct the issue that I proposed into several questions. It is, why are we focusing today on China and India? Are there any other powers, including space powers, that deserve our attention? What are their national interests which underpin the space programs that these two countries have developed in the recent decades? Then we will talk both on the space competition tendencies and space cooperation tendencies. This is a matter of fact that they are both existing in the outer space as the political realm. So we will try to look into several examples into the empirical evidence of these both tendencies taking place in the bilateral relations of China and India. And after all, I will conclude with several remarks and still an open question for you. Is it a weary coexistence or a happy marriage? So let us start. On the left side of the screen, you see some numbers, some concrete numbers that are to showcase you the growing economic, social, and actually political might of these two countries. In terms of the population, UN World Prospects show that as of 2022, these were two most populous countries of the world, and actually they are not only the leaders of the regions, East Asia and South Asia, they are the leaders of the world, and the trend will be ongoing. They account for 35% of growth in urban population, and they are responsible for a significant share of middle class, which means for us in practice that soon they will be the ones to be responsible for the major distributional shifts and for the tendencies on the markets. And in terms of the economic growth, I do believe that you've all heard there were some PwC projections by 2050. Well, they were made in 2018, but still the trend remains still. It is expected that China and India will be the largest economies in terms of GDP by PPP, which is purchasing power parity. And we already see this growing trend, and even despite the pandemic, and even despite all the slowdowns that we've witnessed, even despite the global supply chains disruptions, even despite all the financial volatility and spillover effects of the energy and food crisis, these are two economies that will be in the top 5 at least, or actually China is already the second largest economy and India is the 5th largest economy in the world. But soon we will see even more positive dynamics for these two countries. And actually, these economic successes, they transform into military might as well. As you see on the slide, they are responsible and they are already in top 4 defense budgets. As we see, India already had experience of surpassing United Kingdom in 2017 and 2018. Well, now it's in top 4 defense budgets, but the fact is that both countries are trying to expand their military capabilities, and they are trying and working hard to improve their military might, whether it be conventional arms or, as you will see, their nuclear forces. You all remember that China is an official nuclear club, India is not, but C3 shows us that as of 2022, China possessed about 350 warheads, India possessed about 160 warheads, and we are not even talking about the delivery means that they also possess, including ballistic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles. So these countries have quite an impressive profile, whether this be economic or social or political profile. And of course, these cannot but cause some new tensions which are emerging between 2 countries. But of course, as you see on the right side of the slide, there are also trends that are ongoing and that took their roots and take their roots in the historical background. Since the colonial settlements, you remember that when they gained their post-colonial status, there were a lot of disputes over the territory which were not resolved. And there are still claims that India has over the Aksai Chin territory, which is believed to be the Chinese territory. China has claims over Jammu and Kashmir and Arunachal Pradesh. And of course, there is a line of control, but we do remember that there was the main crisis in 1962, which was true conflict. But as Narendra Modi has recently mentioned, in 40 years, there was not a single bullet fired between the countries on this line of actual control. And this means that the conflict has turned into a kind of a latent stage. There are no open conflictual relations in this regard. But simultaneously, although this conflict is kind of frozen, what we see is that both countries have ambitions of regional scale. If we speak about both China and India, and global scale, if we speak about China. All of them have their background again, and for China, that was a strong period of overcoming the impacts of century of humiliation. And it is just with 21st century when they decided that, well, they are ready to propose some new ideologies, I would say international ideologies to the world. And they proposed either peaceful rise or peaceful development strategies. And now we see that they are turning into a new era of building their international relations with the partners. But majorly, these are ambitions of a superpower, of great power, which is probably even ready to contradict the ambitions of the only superpower now, the US. For India, the ambitions are a bit more moderate, and they also had a couple of strategies. First, well, they were concentrating on the South Asian region only. Now they're speaking more about the Asia Pacific, which covers both South Asia and the Indian Ocean region. But just in general, we are to understand that they are struggling, both China and India, for the same partners. China also tries to gain this attention from the South Asian countries, which are part of the Belt and Road Initiative ambitions. And of course, this causes lots of hesitance and lots of concerns on behalf of India. And the same may be said for China, which has a lot of concerns regarding India's posture in the Indo-Pacific and the trends of rapprochement, like increased rapprochement with the US. And all this happens amidst ever-growing economic cooperation between two countries. This is truly important because they are trying to meddle within these next, like, whether they are dealing with the security issues or whether they are trying to concentrate on their economic potential, on their infrastructure projects, on their investments, and they are balancing in a very delicate manner. And economic cooperation truly matters for both of these countries, but it matters even more for India, because for India, it is China that is the second largest trade partner. Very difficult context in terms of building up their relations, very tense, I would say. And amidst it, it's even more interesting to look into how these concerns, latent concerns, growing concerns in terms of the influence in the region and the tendency to balance with this economic cooperation, how they are projected and how they influence the space relations of these two countries. On this slide, you will see the rationale that the countries have for developing their space programs. And the first part of the slides, you see some general understanding of why going into space. I would not dig deep into this agenda. I would just say that there is even a new discipline that has evolved recently, which is space politics. And there are several dimensions, whether these be space politics in terms of realism, school of liberalism, school of constructivism. But for me, I would say that I found one definition that, as I see it, is a comprehensive one. This is the definition that was proposed by space enthusiast Michael Schicken, and he says that actually exploration of space refers to the actual use of space as another political theater. It is another political theater, and in the long term, exploration of cosmic resources enables enhanced force potential. And if we speak and power potential, hard power, soft power potential, and in the short term, this is the opportunity to multiply your forces and gain an economic asset. And this is, as I see it, what China and India are trying to gain from their relations and from space programs. Speaking in particular about two cases, we have China. And for China, I would say that this is even more concrete strategy. This is a grand strategy that they have, and it is even more detailed. They have an understanding, and this was articulated significantly by Xi Jinping from 2012, that China is now to strive to rejuvenate the nation, the Chinese nation, by 2049, which implies gaining national strength and enhanced international influence. And will not again get deep into this, but I would just say that space is seen as an important component of achieving this China dream. And it was shared with Xi Jinping, with astronauts which were on the board of Shenzhen 10 when they were orbiting the space station Tiangong 1. It was his announcement and his address to the astronauts that they are carrying the space dream. And this is really important, that in the recent space program of China, which was published in the beginning of 2022, in the very preamble, you could see that space industry, space innovations, and going deep into space are a part of an eternal China dream, So we will, thus we understand why China pays such great attention to its aerospace development program. For India, I would say that there is no grand strategy, and even if we speak about some space strategies, there is no concise document, there is no one document that would combine all the efforts of China, of India. But what we see from the statements of the Indian leaders, what we see from their publications in mass media, we shall understand that India tries to gain some benefits from using new technologies for the peaceful use, for the economic and social enhancement of the nation and social development of the nation. There are no grand ambitions. It's very development concentrated. It's concentrated on the national might, on trying to gain national prowess from these space technologies. But well, it also plays a significant attention to the Chinese programs, to the Chinese successes, and to the Chinese influence. And if you look once at the technological achievements of these two countries, if you look at how consecutive they were, if you look into this action-reaction dynamics, you will see that India reacts and sometimes overreacts to the Chinese successes. And of course, this is why some of its space programs and some space ambitions are very well tuned with the previous successes of China. Now we're going to space competition, and again, this is very difficult to cover it in an hour, but what I propose to do now is just to look briefly into why both nations are designated as spacefaring nations. And I will probably try to persuade you that one of them is more advanced and one is less advanced, but both are very ambitious. And this is very interesting and exciting to follow the dynamics of them searching for some new highs in the space ground. So as you will see on the slides, both countries possess capabilities to manufacture and launch rocket carriers. Again, if you are interested, one day you will probably dig into who helped whom at the very beginning stages. I mean, whether it was more the assistance of USSR or the USA, but just again, as a disclaimer, there was significant assistance on both sides in terms of developing both countries' launching capabilities. For instance, China's first rocket modifications were the ones that were, these were actually R1 and R2 rockets that were sent by the USSR, which were themselves modifications of R2. And as for the Indian rockets, they also were based on the technologies of Scout rocket of the American side. And so it developed in a similar vein throughout the years. But anyway, as of now, they do both possess their indigenous capabilities of launching spacecrafts or launching satellites into orbit. The most significant difference, I would say, is that China has already experienced and has already successfully tested and has turned into operation its heavy rocket carriers and this Long March 5 series, and now it's working hard on its super heavy launchers, which is Long March 9 series, and this will be a crucial element to be able to implement its ideas regarding building the International Lunar Research Station and after all landing on the moon in 2035. As for India, India actually recognizes itself that it has a lot to do in terms of upgrading its launching capabilities. As of now, it's able to launch majorly small and medium lift payloads to the rockets to the low Earth orbit, and it's about like 4 tons to be sent to the low Earth orbit. And now it's working hard again on the heavy modification of GSLV NK3 rocket which is needed for India to fulfill its goal of sending a manned craft, a manned mission to the outer space. But we will see how it goes after all. As for the satellites, actually both countries have done a really good job in terms of developing a gamut of satellites, whether this be Earth observation, communications, weather, navigation satellites, or technology demonstration. You see the total numbers, which are provided by the UCS database. They show us this significant gap in terms of operating satellites. Currently, China possesses 541 operating satellite, India 62. But what's important in this regard is that they are fulfilling good the ambition and the targets that they've set for themselves. For instance, well, we may see that India's current number of possessed satellites is insignificant and shall not be taken into consideration. But if we look into the goals that they've had for themselves, well, for instance, they developed the navigation satellite system. Well, it possesses 3 times less satellites than the Beidou system as of now. But the goal was to provide the navigational services for the South Asian region because they wanted to find new customers and they wanted these customers to be loyal to them. And this is why it's even more important that they've launched this IRNSS regional navigation satellite system as a matter of fact, and they are currently working on incorporating these chips into the smartphones of the citizens in the region. It's like 1,500 kilometers, the coverage of this navigational satellite system from New Delhi. So they fulfilled this task. And this is really great because even some maritime organizations, they recognize that this particular Indian system may help well in terms of emergency cases which are there in the Indian Ocean, and they will refer to the Indian capacities. So in this regard, this is great. For Beidou, of course, we do know that it can be highly compared. It can be hardly compared with the capacity of India. And now that this is the 3rd stage already implemented in terms of this Beidou program, China are now able to provide the services not only to the inside the country or not only inside the Asia Pacific, but actually they are able to provide navigational services globally. And here again, we do see these on the one hand, overlapping ambitions, on the other hand, a bit diverse in terms of their globalness. So. But still, if we look into observation, communications, and other satellites, it's necessary to say that they, according to what I've read, they've already recommended themselves as high-quality ones. So this is truly important. As for lunar and Mars missions, as mentioned on the screen, there have been diverse successes. And of course, China is a step ahead. You've already heard, I'm sure, about successful Chang'e missions, whether this be Chang'e 4 when they landed. This was the first country to land on the far side of the moon, or whether this be Chang'e 5 mission when they managed to return lunar sample back to Earth, and there are already many researchers on the geological specificities of this sample. Of course, for India, these were not so loud successes, I would say. There was only one, as of now, successful mission, Chandrayaan 1, and probably it was majorly successful because the particular goal was to analyze the water containment of in the lunar, again, on the lunar surface to find whether there are water in this region or another region of the moon surface. So it was actually the US payload that helped to measure and take the measurements. not the Indian capacity itself, not the Indian instruments themselves. And with the second and third missions of India to the moon surface, there were difficulties because first there were some troubles with, actually it was the cooperative program between India and Russia, and there were some troubles, I would say, technical, administrative on the Russian side. So Chandrayaan-2 did not get to the moon surface as it expected to. And now India is working on Chandrayaan-3 mission, and so we are to see whether it works out or not. But this is interesting. I haven't mentioned it, but one of the peculiarities of the Indian program and how it projects itself to the world community is that it proposes low-cost technologies. It also applies to the launchers, because India mentions not even once, but actually to all the customers, that it may provide very low-cost launches of their payloads to the Earth's orbit. And actually, this is the same thing which applies to their lunar mission, and probably this is why Chandrayaan-2 and Chandrayaan-3 did not reach their goal, because the financial in terms of finance, India decided that it will be able to conduct its mission, paying for it just about 100, as far as I remember. I will not lie to you. I will look for it. Well, anyway, it was designed to be a very low cost mission, and actually, if with the lunar projects this did not work well, this worked extremely well with the Mangalyaan case, which was a Mars mission, and India managed to launch its Mars orbiter in 2014, and it's still gaining the information of the Martian surface and sending it back to the Earth. As for China, I guess you are well aware of the fact that China also has a very successful experience of getting to Mars. Well, it did it 6 years later than India, but after all, it was again an indigenous program, and it was successful in terms of landing and in terms of managing to land a rover there. Probably you've also seen some Instagram-like pictures that Jervon sent to the Earth, and as far as we understand, China is not going to halt its Mars program. It will upgrade it so that one day it sends back the Mars sample to the Earth with the perspective of colonizing Mars. Probably we will see it one day. Again, well, probably a small note that for both Moon and Mars, we shall understand that there have been successful stories for both of the countries, but more ambitious, of course, is the story and the plans of China, because for India it will be almost unimaginable to get there and to build either ILRS or to take the sample return back in a decade or 2 decades. Too many financial constraints, too many administrative constraints. Again, successes in terms of manned space flights on the side of China, you're well aware of it. And last year, we witnessed the finalization of the assembly of the Tiangong-3 mission. It's a space station, which consists of 3 orbital modules, and it's a very interesting case of China managing to conduct this mission itself, especially amidst the ISS retiring in 5 years or so. So probably China will be able to and will be ready to host some international astronaut teams aboard its space station, and this way will show its might to its main rival, which is the US. As for India, they've revealed their plans recently. They are planning to conduct the first manned mission to the low Earth orbit in 2024, but again, we will see whether it works out. As for space budgets, I will not comment about it, but just look at the numbers when you send the materials, and probably you will be interested in comparing the figures both between China and India and how it compares with the US case. On the right side of the slide, you will see that the space competition is not only ongoing in terms of civilian infrastructure, it's also ongoing in terms of the counter space capabilities, which both countries have started to develop in recent years. And these are two slides that have been taken from the report that's prepared by the Secure World Foundation. This is an annual report. And again, there are lots of technical details that they take from the open source. But here we will just see a very bright illustration of which capabilities both countries possess. And in terms of China, we will see that they've been working hard in terms of advancing their rendezvous and proximity operations, so that to enable some co-orbital missions, for instance, grabbing a satellite, another satellite with a robotic arm, or changing their altitude or orbital characteristics of their own satellite to approach another satellite and just to conduct some intelligence, surveillance, well, that would be more intelligence missions. And this is one aspect of them developing their counter space capabilities. Another aspect is has gained more attention in mass media. It is that the country is currently possessing either one or at least probably 3 programs underway to develop the direct ascent inter-satellite capabilities, which means that these space systems, counter space systems, they have a kinetic vehicle payload, which is able to destroy the satellite on the low Earth orbit. And this is in fact what we witnessed in the year 2007, when there was the collision of the Fengyun meteorological satellite with the ballistic missile, which is SC-19 in terms of numeration by the US. What matters? The fact that it was placed, and the very collision took place at the altitude of about 800 kilometers. And when it happened, there was such an enormous amount of space debris emerging from that collision. It was like 3,000 space debris particles, 10 centimeters and more, that spreads over the orbits, and not the only orbit that it was floating, but the orbits beyond, orbits above. And even now, this is the greatest number of space debris which is in outer space after such a collision. And of course, there were very many concerns in terms of and reaction in terms of whether it was responsible behavior or irresponsible behavior. You've heard this debate, but it's indicative how India reacted to this occasion. It actually established its integrated space cell. It was a kind of a defense agency which decided that it has to coordinate its military capabilities and civilian capabilities with the ISRO. And this was the moment that made India sure that it needs to develop its own capability, same capability of being able to test and launch direct ascent anti-satellite tests. There are also research and development in terms of directed energy, in terms of electronic warfare, and in terms of space situational awareness. China possesses great capabilities in terms of detection of missile launchers and missile warning system. And all these programs that have been somehow revealed by the experts, they influenced India directly. And as I mentioned, since 27, they were elaborating their key 3 programs on LEO direct ascent, directed energy, and well, electronic warfare is under question. But in terms of its deterrence of Chinese might, of Chinese threats, what India did was launching Shakti mission and conducting Shakti mission. It was 2019 when India conducted, I would say, almost similar testing of its direct ascent capabilities, like China did in 27, India did it in 2019. And the key difference was the altitude that they've chosen. If China chose the altitude of 800 kilometers, India chose 300 kilometers, and that allowed space debris enter into the atmosphere at a higher speed, at a higher pace. And this is why they caused less concern on behalf of the international community. So I would say that the international community was quite loyal towards India, while it raised lots of concerns in terms of Chinese tests in 2007. I see that we are approaching the end of the session, but I'll go faster probably. In terms of space competition, 2 more items that I wanted to cover were a reflection of each other, a reflection on the factor of each other in mutual documents. That's interesting that China, till 2022, it did not directly emphasize the need to ensure national space security in regard to Indian threat. It just posed very broad formulations regarding the need to ensure sustainable and reliable space infrastructure. And just after the direct ascent test of India took place, 2022, we see some new formulations in Chinese white papers, which is the need to ensure free access, efficient use and effective management of space, and the need to ensure defense of national security, self-reliance and self-improvement efforts. So this is the first hint on the Indian threat. But majorly, I would say that this is again an indication of its concerns with the US program. As for India, India is more concerned with the Chinese threat. If you look at the documents which somehow contain the space element, including joint armed forces doctrine, land warfare doctrine, and even the general report of the Indian National Congress, you will see the direct indication of the Chinese threat. So this is the clear indication that for Indian sides, as I've shown previously, the space ambition, the national space ambition, is largely interlinked with the success of China and China's threats. New emerging points of contention, not sure, but I guess that they've been covered either yesterday or today during the previous discussion. New points of contention in the UN General Assembly, you've covered this. There has been a new resolution that was proposed by the UK on the new space norms, rules, and principles of responsible behavior. It's just interesting to notice that India has been abstaining for several years while China voted against. China and Russia voted against, India was abstaining. The same happened for last year resolution, which was proposed by the US side. It was the resolution which was aimed at hindering and halting destructive direct descent anti-satellite missile testing. Also another controversial initiative on the US side, but probably you've covered it and all the implications that it has. And again, the same story with the voting, India abstaining while China and Russia voted against. This is a precedent, I would say a negative one, but it fits well into the story of space competition and the general constraints that they have in terms of their bilateral relations. And a new story, which is yet to be elaborated. This is the Quad resuming its activities more intensively since 2019, when the ministers met since several previous years. And just interesting to look into the joint leaders statement that was adopted there in Japan, which has several commitments, and India is a part to these commitments. And here we see again these, well, latent but still hint to the Chinese threat, which the countries want to reject, making more contributions to their combined Earth observation capabilities by convergence of their understanding of potential rules, norms, and guidelines of sustainable use of space. And this is interlinked with their ambitions in terms of maritime domain awareness. And I guess you're all well aware of the fact that the main trouble, apart from territorial disputes with China, for India is the claims that China has over South China Sea and unresolved issues after the UNCLOS decision. And again, this is a response that India is a part to in terms of containing China's string of pearls strategy. But making it a bit more positive, going and approaching the end of the lecture, I would say that there have been precedents of mutual bilateral undertakings in the relations between the countries, and I would not diminish their importance, despite the fact that, well, both countries, they either relied on the capability of the US, of the USSR. Well, these were politics, and when the politics with the great superpowers finished in that previous configuration, they had to think about their internal relations, about their bilateral relations. And then they came in 2014 when there was a greater rapprochement and there were bilateral visits and state visits of one country to another. Now, there was adopted a memorandum of understanding between the space agencies of China and India, the main focus of which were space, remote sensing satellites, communication satellites, scientific experiment satellites, and actually they majorly agreed upon conducting research and development activities together. And more interesting for us is probably the space cooperation outline that was agreed upon in 2015. It's more interesting for us because it has some contents. It's more substantial in its nature, and there are 7 direct dimensions that the countries have agreed upon cooperating. And these embraces the issues of meteorology, again, remote sensing, launching services that they will probably exchange of experience on satellite navigations and space components, education and training activities, and so on and so forth. Weird, but well, more or less expected fact is that there has been no update of the space cooperation outline in 2021, but we see that the politics are getting into, again, a new configuration, and probably with a new place India wants to play in not only space politics, but in the world politics, and probably does not want to make some strong commitments with China at this particular moment. seen more opportunities in balancing between China and the US and taking into account more pleasantly the US proposals. Anyway, there have also been working groups that still exist, but there is very limited information regarding whether they gathered after 2015 and 2019. But still, well, let's believe that they do exist and that they maintain their activities. And if we look at the multilateral undertakings, the picture is more comprehensive and it's more positive. And again, this is very interesting because even if there is constrained and limited interaction in terms of bilateral undertakings, if we look into the multilateral undertakings, we see a very important point that as of now, nobody wants to change the current international governance system, and nobody wants to change it substantially in terms of regulating outer space. Especially these, well, I speak about China and India, that nobody wants. China and India do not want to change the current configuration that they have. They are both actively working on the sidelines of the UN. They are both signatories, and they ratified the 4 key UN space-related treaties. The 5th one was the Moon Agreement. It was signed but not ratified by India, but it has its reasons. It believes that space resources is the common heritage of mankind. It has its right to think so. There are lots of discussions in this regard. And as for the key initiatives that are there on the table right now, as I mentioned, this is changing just in recent years, but majorly for several decades, both China and India have been on the same side of negotiations. This refers to the general Paris discussions. This refers to the draft treaty that was proposed by Russia and China and then modified. And this refers to more narrow initiatives on the no first placement of weapons in outer space, TCBMs, for 2 decades. And since these initiatives were proposed on the sidelines of the UN, China and India worked hand in hand, and they never undermined each other's trust. And as for the cooperative structures and cooperative groupings, that they have been slightly mentioned by the previous speakers, but I will just remind you that what we witness now is the launch and amplification of the space component of such groupings as BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and G20. And the previous year, we witnessed already the first meeting of the BRICS Joint Committee on Space Cooperation. And there is an agreement on cooperation in terms of remote sensing satellites. There have been agreements in terms of data exchange and how this will be gathered, and how all these satellites will just be open, and infrastructure will be open to each of the sides. There are new procedures there. It's interesting that Shanghai Cooperation Organization also maintains these dialogue, but it's majorly on the principles of space cooperation, on the UN principles. And G20, what we see there is the launch of the space economy track. And this time, it's actually India that is taking the reign in and taking the presidency in G20. And it will be quite interesting how it will develop this space economy dimension there, and whether it will be benefiting from the BRICS support within this G20 structure. This was quite a summary of what could be said of the bilateral relations between China and India in space. But making a kind of a conclusion, I would say what I've decided for myself regarding how we may characterize these relationships. what we witness is on the Indian side, for sure, the key motive of developing a space program, of developing some new initiatives there in space, and on behaving on the space politics arena is the feeling of security dilemma. This is kind of space security dilemma is a part of a general security dilemma. We've looked into the first slide, and we saw that there is this general understanding of this rivalry, which is a regional rivalry, and India doesn't want to be set aside by the Chinese ambitions and by the Chinese economic, political, and other might. So this is why we see these space programs which go step by step after the Chinese successes. This is why we see this overreaction in terms of launching a new division, integrated space cell, right after the anti-satellite testing of China. And if you look into the mass media publications, you will see lots of reaction of India trying to emphasize that it is in the situation, standpoint of a security, ongoing security dilemma with China, and it wants to deter China. And for this reason, it is balancing, this is becoming even more evident in the recent years. It's balancing using its rapprochement in relationships with the US and other countries in so-called Indo-Pacific region. For the Chinese side, this is also a security dilemma, but it's a security dilemma with another participant, with another spacefarer nation. This is a security dilemma in the relationships with the US, the global space power, and only the threats that are posed and witnessed by China ongoing and emerging on the US side. These are the key motives, these are the key incentives of the Chinese deeds and programmatic speeches and the statements that they make. But actually the Indian side claims that no, China is somehow lying. It's still very cautious of the Indian successes. But if you look at the Chinese statements, we will doubt that Chinese side is so cautious about the Indian side, is more cautious about the US successes. But whatever the case, what we see is that in the future, in the coming future, there will be only more space assets, more space programs, more space activities on both sides. And this will create only new feelings of vulnerability on both sides. And this is why I believe that it will be very important for both countries to look and to explore these potential stairs of escalation that we may witness in the forthcoming future. Because now what we see is the non-conflictual stance. This is only a competition. Both countries understand the perils of coming and of turning their relationships into an open conflict. For China, this is, as we see from the statements, this is not even a question because it does not want an open conflict or even any kind of a conflict with India. And this is more a question for India when it will decide that it wants to challenge the Chinese threat, to challenge the Chinese might, and probably benefit from this balancing and romantic relationship with the US. And this is probably a question for you, for us, for all the researchers. And the question of how we and probably the Russian side may incorporate into this game, whether we may influence this ongoing relations between China and India, whether we may benefit from the instruments, from the multilateral instruments that we possess, and may probably, as we do it already in BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, maybe we may persuade China and India that it is in our general interest to work together rather than compete with no evident implications and with no evident result of this competition. So with this intervention, I would again probably pose a question for you to think over in the time after the school finishes, whether you believe that these Chinese-Indian relationships in space could be characterized as the rare coexistence. I'm proud to think that this is the case, or maybe probably it's happy marriage still sort of relationships. And I do understand that there is formats of providing feedback and some of your thoughts after the lecture. So if you share some of your understandings and some of your reflections on this topic, I would be grateful and interested in listening to you too. And final remark is that what you see on the right side on the slide, I just believe that it's interesting which faces and what sort of faces we may find on the new surfaces. This is actually what Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter found on the Martian surface. Face of a bear. That's quite funny. I believe to craters make the eyes of this bear. Then there is this circular fracture with a kind of a face and V-shaped collapse structure, which is kind of a nose. I just wish you a good day, and with this, I will stop my speech. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Evgenia Valerievna. Dear participants, we're closing our session, and if you mention our chat, you may leave your questions in our Telegram. And thank you very much for your work today, and we'll see you tomorrow according to our schedule. Best wishes and thank you.